My dad smiled and said, "Don't embarrass yourself, leave the pitch to your brother." After I landed a $30 million deal with a single presentation, I just whispered, "Embarrassed yet?" Everyone in that room went silent. I'm still trying to process the last few months. My dad, who's been emotionally distant my whole life, has always favored my brother. Last week, my brother was supposed to present a multi-million-dollar deal to some investors for our family's business. I had been working on a new pitch in secret for weeks and decided to present it to my dad when things started falling apart for my brother. He told me to sit down and let Blake handle it. He didn't believe in me. In a last-ditch effort, I stood up and presented my plan instead. I landed the deal. Everyone in the room was speechless. My dad, the man who's always put my brother first, smiled, turned to Blake, and said, "Don't embarrass yourself. Leave the pitch to your sister." I've spent most of my life trying to be good enough for my father. Lawrence Sanderson, a cold and distant man, has always been the center of our family's world, especially when it comes to his business. He runs Sanderson and Company, a prestigious investment firm that has been the backbone of our family's wealth. But it's never felt like it was our family's wealth. It always felt like it was his company, his success, his achievements, and mine was just a small afterthought. I'm Isabel Sanderson, the youngest of 2 children, and let's just say that my relationship with my father has been complicated. Blake, my older brother, is the golden child. Tall, confident, and always surrounded by admirers, Blake has never had to struggle for attention or validation. He's always had it easy. And, unsurprisingly, he's always been the one to step into the spotlight in our family. I, on the other hand, spent most of my childhood in the shadows. I wasn't athletic like Blake, and I certainly wasn't charming. I was smart, though, and I had a knack for business strategies and financial models that I never got to showcase. My father would spend hours talking shop with Blake, but when I'd bring up ideas, he'd dismiss them. "Girls don't belong in this business," he'd say, almost as a joke, but there was truth behind it. It wasn't just about the company. It was about everything. But that didn't stop me. After graduating from a small state university, I took a job at a consulting firm. It wasn't a glamorous job by any means, but it gave me the opportunity to learn the ropes of the business world. I spent my days reading, studying market trends, and understanding financial models. I knew my worth, I just couldn't prove it to anyone who mattered. Then came the day that would change everything. It all started with a phone call that Friday afternoon. I was sitting in my small apartment in the city when I received the news. My dad's firm had a huge opportunity on the line. A rival company was looking for a partner to help them secure a $30 million contract, and the pitch meeting was coming up fast. Of course, Blake was going to handle it. He was the prodigal son. I expected that. I don't think my father ever even considered asking me to pitch. After all, it was Blake's job, wasn't it? But I had been working on something. For months, I had been researching this potential deal in my spare time, crafting a proposal that I truly believed could land the contract. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for permission. I just worked on it because I knew that I could do this. So when I found out about the pitch, I decided to share my work. I walked into my father's office with my proposal in hand, hoping that, just maybe, he would see the value in it. I knocked softly on the door, and when I was let in, I could feel the tension. Blake was there, of course. He sat in his usual spot across from my father's desk, grinning like he owned the room. I stood there, uncertain, but pushed forward. "Dad, I've been working on something for the pitch," I said, holding up my binder. "I think this could be the key to landing the deal." He didn't even look at me. Blake glanced up from his phone, then back down, uninterested. I felt small, invisible. "Isabel, please," my father said, his voice icy as always. "Don't embarrass yourself. Leave the pitch to Blake." I froze. The words cut through me like a knife. It wasn't the first time he had brushed me off, but for some reason, this time felt different. There was no fight in me, no words that could change his mind. I tried to speak, to argue, but I knew it wouldn't matter. My father's mind was already made up. Blake snickered, his eyes cold with amusement. Yeah, Izzy, you've got no place here. Let the big boys handle this one. I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks, my hands trembling. But instead of exploding with anger like I wanted to, I did what I'd learned to do my whole life. I shut my mouth and left. I walked out of my father's office, feeling like a failure all over again. That night, I went home and, for hours, reviewed my proposal. I couldn't just let it go. There was no way I was going to let my father's words be the end of it. I stayed up late, tweaking the pitch, going over every detail until I felt confident enough to present it myself. If no one else believed in me, I was going to believe in myself. The next morning, I showed up at the office, the weight of the world on my shoulders. Blake had already started his presentation. My father was there, of course, sitting at the head of the conference table. The investors sat in the front row, looking ready to hear the next big idea. Blake started his presentation with his usual confidence, but I could see the cracks already forming. He wasn't prepared. He was winging it, just like he always did. His slides were unorganized, his ideas scattered. I couldn't watch this fall apart. Not when I knew I could do better. I stood up. The room went silent as I walked to the front. My father's face turned pale. Blake's jaw dropped in disbelief. Isabel? My father's voice was strained. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. I'm presenting this. Blake looked like he was about to say something, but my father shot him a look. Let her, he muttered, barely audible. I stood there, facing the investors, and I began to speak. I laid out my strategy, the market analysis, the opportunities that had been missed by Blake. As I spoke, I could feel the tension in the room. The investors, at first skeptical, started to listen intently. I could see the way their eyes shifted, the way they started to nod along. It was working. The silence that followed felt like a weight. The room seemed to hold its breath. My father, who had always looked down on me, who had always expected nothing from me, finally gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement. I had his attention. And then, my dad did something I never expected. He smiled. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. He looked at Blake, who was still standing there in stunned silence. Don't embarrass yourself, Blake, my father said quietly. Leave the pitch to your sister. The room was completely still. Blake didn't speak. The investors exchanged glances. It felt surreal, almost like I was outside my body, watching this all unfold from a distance. I finished my presentation, and the deal was sealed. I had just secured a $30 million contract with a single pitch. As I left the conference room, I heard Blake's voice, tinged with bitterness. You think you've won? This is just one deal. You'll never replace me. But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I had finally earned my place. And for the first time, I didn't need my father's approval to know I was worthy. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of triumph and tension. The $30 million deal I had secured didn't just bring financial success, it shifted the entire atmosphere at Sanderson and Company. Suddenly, I wasn't just the daughter who had been pushed aside. I wasn't the quiet one who lived in the shadow of Blake's charm and my father's expectations. No, I had proven myself in a way I never thought possible, but the price was steep. Blake barely spoke to me. In fact, he went out of his way to avoid me. I knew it wasn't just about the deal. It was about the fact that I had, in his eyes, stolen something that he believed was his for the taking. I could tell he was angry, but not in the usual way. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. There was something deeper beneath the surface. I saw it in his eyes every time I passed him in the hall, every time I walked into a room and found him glaring from the corner. But my father? He was quieter than usual. He didn't give me the praise I secretly hoped for. Sure, he acknowledged that the deal had gone through thanks to my pitch, but it wasn't with warmth. It was with cold, calculated approval, like something that was a necessary step but not one worth celebrating. The office felt like a battleground, and I had to keep my head down. Blake's absence from meetings became more noticeable. It was clear he wasn't thrilled about being overshadowed, and I could sense he was distancing himself more than ever. But I wasn't going to apologize for doing my job well. This wasn't about proving something to him or to my father, it was about proving it to myself. But that didn't stop the whispers. One day, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings, I found myself in my father's office. He hadn't said much all week, barely acknowledging me when we passed each other in the hallways. As I stepped into his office, I didn't even knock. I had a lot on my mind, and I wasn't going to wait for him to summon me. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, shutting the door behind me. He looked up, his eyes tired, but I could see the faintest glimmer of something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger, but it wasn't approval either. Just blankness. "What is it, Isabel?" he asked, his voice distant, as usual. He'd always been like this, an emotional fortress, impossible to penetrate. "I don't understand," I began, struggling to find the right words. "Why are you treating me like this? I did something important for this company, and you've barely acknowledged it. Instead, you're letting Blake sulk in his own misery. He's not even showing up for work anymore. Why are you letting this go?" My father sighed, rubbing his temples like he had a headache. "Isabel," he began, his voice slow, as if carefully choosing his words. "You did well, yes. But you have to understand. Blake is my son. He's the one who will eventually run this business. You need to stop fighting for something that isn't yours." I felt my stomach drop. I knew what he was going to say, but hearing it out loud stung. The words were like a slap to my face, and for a moment, I struggled to breathe. "That's not fair," I said, my voice quivering, despite my best efforts to remain composed. "I'm not trying to take anything from him. I'm just trying to prove that I can contribute. I've been working for this, Dad, for years. And it's not about taking his place. It's about having a place of my own." He looked at me for a moment, his eyes unreadable, before his expression softened ever so slightly. "You think this is about fairness?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Business isn't about fairness, Isabel. It's about survival. And Blake is my son. I've already made plans for him. What you did, it was impressive, but it doesn't change anything. You've always been a good daughter, but this is Blake's world. You need to accept that." I swallowed hard, the words cutting through me like a blade. I had worked so hard for this. I had pushed myself to prove that I belonged, and yet it felt like all of that had been for nothing. My father had already decided my role in this family, and no amount of success would change it. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I stood there in silence, feeling the walls close in around me. My father's gaze never wavered, but it wasn't kind. It wasn't proud. It was just neutral. He had said what he needed to say, and there was nothing left to discuss. The days that followed were uncomfortable. My father didn't change his behavior. Blake's silence became louder with each passing day. He refused to acknowledge my success, even though everyone else around the company was talking about it. I tried to reach out to him a few times, but every attempt was met with cold indifference. It was clear to me now, my family was broken. Or, maybe it had always been broken, and I had only just realized it. But even with the tension, I couldn't give up. I had made a decision that day in my father's office. I was no longer going to wait for his approval. I had to create my own path. Even if it meant walking away from Sanderson and Company, I was ready to make a life for myself. But the choice wasn't simple. Every move I made at work, every decision I took, seemed to be met with resistance from Blake. He wasn't just avoiding me, he was actively trying to sabotage me. It wasn't overt, there were no shouting matches or blatant confrontations. But I could feel the tension in the air every time we were in the same room. I knew he was undermining me in small, subtle ways, leaving out crucial information during meetings, dismissing my ideas before they even had a chance to be considered. I wasn't just fighting for my place in the company anymore. I was fighting for my dignity. And as much as I hated the situation, I couldn't walk away. I wasn't going to give up the life I had worked so hard to build, no matter what. But then, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Blake came to me. He didn't knock on my office door, he just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, looking exhausted. His usual confidence had been replaced with something softer, something I couldn't quite place. "Izzy," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." I looked up from my desk, surprised by the calmness in his voice. It was rare for Blake to even address me directly unless it was to make some snide comment or belittle me in front of others. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. "What is it?" I asked, setting my pen down, unsure whether to brace for a confrontation or something else entirely. He stood there for a moment, his eyes darting around the room like he was looking for the right words. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "For everything. For what I've said. For how I've treated you. You didn't deserve any of that." For the first time in my life, I didn't know how to respond. Blake was apologizing. He was actually apologizing. I stood there, stunned, processing what was happening. I blinked, trying to make sense of what Blake had just said. My brother, the golden boy who had always been the center of attention in our family, was apologizing. Not only was he apologizing, but it felt sincere. I didn't know how to respond, so I just stood there, the words I had been preparing for so long stuck in my throat. Blake took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had finally been lifted off of him. "Look, I don't know how I ended up like this. I don't know when I started treating you like you were less than me. But after everything that happened with the deal, with Dad, I realized I was wrong. You've been doing this, fighting for your place, and I've been so focused on my own ego that I didn't even see it." I stared at him, my mind racing. Blake had always been the one who got what he wanted with ease, who had the support of our father, who was always the first choice for everything. But now, here he was, standing in front of me, vulnerable for the first time in my life. I wasn't sure if I should accept his apology right away. I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling a mix of emotions. "Why now?" I asked, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "Why the apology, Blake? Why didn't you say something before? Why did you have to act like I didn't even matter?" He winced at my words but didn't look away. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "I thought if I admitted that you were right, it would mean I wasn't good enough. I thought if I let you in, let you get ahead, it would somehow make me look weak. But the truth is, I've been weak this whole time. I've been so insecure that I couldn't see the person who was always right there, doing the work and proving herself, not just in the office, but in everything." His words hit me like a tidal wave. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him how much pain he had caused me over the years. How many times I had sat in that office, wondering if I would ever get the same respect that he did, wondering if I would ever be seen as more than just the daughter. But then I remembered everything I had done to get here. I had fought for every inch of respect I had earned. I didn't need Blake's apology to feel validated. I didn't need my father's approval to know I had value. Yet, hearing Blake say this, hearing him finally admit his own flaws, was something I hadn't expected. I let out a deep sigh and uncrossed my arms, the tension in my shoulders slowly dissipating. "I don't know what to say, Blake," I said, my voice softer now. "It's not that I want to keep holding this grudge. It's just that for so long, I felt like I was invisible. Like I didn't matter. And I don't know if one apology is going to change that." He nodded, looking down at the floor as if the weight of his own words was too much to bear. "I get it. I don't expect it to fix everything. I just needed you to know that I see you. I see the work you put in, and I regret the way I treated you. I never should have let Dad and my own insecurities dictate what you could or couldn't do. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the unspoken words hanging between us. It felt strange, almost surreal. I didn't know if I could fully trust his apology, but the fact that he was standing here, admitting his mistakes, made me realize that maybe, just maybe, things could be different between us. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. I'm not saying I forgive you right away, Blake. I'm not even sure I know how to. But, thank you for saying it. I didn't expect this. Blake's face softened, the first genuine look of relief crossing his features. I don't deserve your forgiveness yet. I know that. But I'm hoping, in time, we can fix this. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said, taking a step back. But we can start with something. Maybe that's a step forward. Blake smiled slightly, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. I'll take what I can get, he said quietly. Thanks, Izzy. I nodded, and before either of us could say anything else, he turned and walked out of my office, leaving me standing there alone. I stared after him for a moment, processing everything he had said, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was progress. At least now, there was a chance for something different, something better. But as I sat back down at my desk, a new set of thoughts started to take shape in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Blake's apology, while appreciated, didn't change the reality of our family. I had spent my whole life trying to live in the shadow of my father's expectations, trying to gain his approval through accomplishments, through being good enough. And even though I had earned the respect of the business world, it still felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. I had no illusions about my place in this family anymore. My father would never fully see me the way I wanted him to. But Blake, he was a different story. His apology had given me a glimpse of something I never thought possible, the idea that, despite everything, we could find a way to be equals, not competitors. We could carve out a new relationship, one based on mutual respect, not on rivalry. But it would take time. And I wasn't sure I was ready to fully trust him yet. I sat back in my chair, looking out the window at the bustling city below. The future was uncertain, and there were still a lot of unanswered questions. But I wasn't going to give up on myself. Not anymore. Not after everything I had fought for. And as I looked down at my desk, my gaze landed on the pitch presentation that had started it all. It was a reminder of the strength I had found within myself. No matter what happened next, I knew that I had built something on my own. I wasn't just Isabel Sanderson, the daughter of Lawrence Sanderson. I was Isabel Sanderson, a woman who had earned her place in this world. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally living for myself. I sat at my desk, staring out of the window as the city hummed below, lost in thought. Blake's apology had been a turning point, but it didn't make everything go back to normal. The tension between us still simmered beneath the surface, and my father, well, my father was still my father. He wasn't going to change overnight. But as much as I wanted to believe things would get better, I had learned one thing above all else: the family business, my father's love, and the respect I craved, they would never be handed to me. I had to earn every ounce of it, and I wasn't going to wait around for my family to make that decision for me anymore. I had worked my entire adult life to prove I could succeed on my own terms, and despite the challenges, I had done just that. The $30 million deal wasn't just a victory for the company, it was my victory, and I knew that no one could take it from me. Not Blake, not my father. Not even the lingering resentment that had followed me for years. But there was still something unfinished. Over the next few weeks, things didn't exactly improve with Blake. Sure, he'd apologized, and sure, we were on speaking terms now, but it wasn't the kind of relationship that could be fixed with a few words. He still looked at me like I had somehow stolen his future, and I knew deep down that resentment was never going to disappear. But the truth was, I wasn't concerned with his bitterness anymore. I was done trying to make him understand. I was done trying to prove anything to him. The real challenge now was my father. He had never given me the approval I had longed for. He never looked at me the way he looked at Blake, with that warmth, that pride. And I had been foolish to think that the deal would change anything. If anything, it only reminded me of how far I had to go to prove myself in this family. But then, it hit me. I had been thinking all along that I needed their validation, that I needed my father to approve of me. I had spent years chasing that approval, running after something that was never really mine to begin with. I didn't need them. I had built my own success, my own reputation. The moment of clarity was both liberating and devastating. My relationship with my father, my relationship with Blake, they could never be what I hoped. But that didn't mean I had to keep fighting for their approval. I was done fighting for a place at the table. One evening, after yet another tension-filled family dinner at my father's house, I found myself standing in the hallway, my hands trembling as I gripped the back of a chair. Blake had barely looked at me the entire night. My father had been absent, lost in his thoughts, as usual. The conversation had been strained, and I could feel the weight of my frustration building in my chest. As I prepared to leave, my father finally looked at me, his cold gaze piercing. "Isabel," he said, his tone unusually sharp. "I've been thinking about the direction of the business. And it seems we need to make some changes." I looked at him, unsure where this was going. "What kind of changes?" He sighed, his face tight. "I think it's time for you to step back a little. Blake will be taking on more responsibility moving forward. I need you to focus on other areas. We can't have you undermining his position in the company, especially after the recent success." My heart sank. There it was. The rejection, the dismissal. It wasn't just a business decision, it was personal. He had just made it clear that no matter what I achieved, I would never be his first choice. No matter how hard I worked, I would always be second to Blake. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All the anger, all the frustration, it bubbled up in my chest. But instead of letting it consume me, something inside me clicked. I realized I didn't need his approval. I didn't need to play by his rules anymore. I wasn't going to let him crush me. I wasn't going to let him dictate my life any longer. "Fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'll step back." "But you're wrong, Dad. This business, you can keep it. But I'm done with it. Done with you. And done with Blake." His eyes widened in shock, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I turned and walked out of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Over the next few months, I did something that, at first, seemed impossible. I built my own company. It wasn't as big as Sanderson and Company, not at first. But it was mine. I took the slaughters I had honed over the years, the knowledge I had gained from all my research and hard work, and I applied it. I started small, working with clients who valued my expertise, who didn't care about my last name. And slowly, my business grew. I gained traction. Clients started taking me seriously. The day I signed my first major contract, bigger than any deal I had secured at Sanderson and Company, was one of the best days of my life. I didn't need my father to approve of me. I didn't need his validation to know I was successful. I had built something from scratch. Something that was all mine. A few months later, I received an email from Blake. It was short, a little awkward, but it was something. He was reaching out, trying to mend the broken bridge. He mentioned that he had noticed the success of my new business and asked if we could meet. I was hesitant at first. I didn't know if I was ready to rebuild anything with him. But something told me that maybe this time, it wouldn't be about rivalry or approval. Maybe, just maybe, it could be about respect. We met at a small cafe in the city, and when Blake walked in, I could see the shift in him. He looked more tired, more subdued. He wasn't the confident, cocky brother I had once known. He was someone different now. Maybe that was the difference, he was no longer the golden child in our father's eyes. Maybe he was finally realizing that success couldn't be inherited. "Isabel," he said, sitting across from me. "I just wanted to say. I've been watching what you've done with your business. And I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I never thought I'd say that, but you've earned it. I raised an eyebrow, unsure if I could fully trust him yet. You know, Blake, I don't need your approval anymore. I've learned to build my own success. I know, he said, his voice quieter. I just wanted to let you know that I see you. And I'm sorry for everything I did. It wasn't the kind of apology I had expected, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt like he wasn't just saying the words to appease me. He meant it. I appreciate that, I said slowly. But just so you know, I'm not interested in competing with you anymore. I'm done with that. Blake nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I get it. I just wanted to make things right. For the first time, we didn't have to compete. We didn't have to fight for our father's love. We could both stand on our own 2 feet. Years later, I look back on that time with a sense of peace. My father never fully came around. He never acknowledged my business the way he did Blake's. But that was fine. I didn't need him to. I had built something on my own, something that was mine, without anyone's approval. And Blake? We never became best friends, but we found a way to coexist. There was no longer resentment between us, just mutual respect. We both had our separate paths, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to walk mine. As for Sanderson and Company, it continued to thrive without me. And that, in a strange way, was its own form of victory. I didn't need my father's company. I had built my own. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.